Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, hosting today's show. And the first graphic up should be hazardous weather graphic, showing a yellow shading there for the eastern Arctic coast, eastern North Slope. That's for a wind chill advisory that's out through midday Saturday, tomorrow, and that's for wind chills to 50 degrees below zero. And then the other area there down to the southwest Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, that's a winter weather advisory out through Saturday for tonight through tomorrow. And that's for snow, blowing snow, wind chills to 40 degrees below zero, and mostly blowing snow occasionally in areas reducing visibilities to less than half a mile at times, with winds gusting to 40 miles an hour. Again, resulting in wind chills down to 40 degrees below zero. And then down to the south, eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, winter weather advisory continues out tonight for those areas for maybe another inch of snowfall, and then the gusty winds reducing visibilities to less than a half mile at times. Winds gusting high as 40 miles an hour, 40 to 45 miles an hour across there, and probably staying pretty breezy there, especially for the Alaska Peninsula into the week or through the weekend. A little bit improvement on Sunday. And from there, looking at the first outlook for river breakup for later this spring, actually might kick into gear next month, probably will. Anyway, looking at currently high snowpack across the state of Alaska, and observed near normal river ice thicknesses as well, and expecting a normal spring warm-up pattern. No reason to think it wouldn't be. And so with the heavier snowpack, there's an increased chance for snow melt flooding for most of the state. And from there, moving on to satellite imagery, pretty strong low pressure area, southern Gulf of Alaska there, northeast Pacific, and the front pushing in to the southeast coast and the North Gulf Coast, backing in toward Kodiak Island, and then out over the Bristol Bay area, another system circulation there with a much colder air back to the west and to the south of that feature, wrapping in around northerly winds all the way from the Bering Strait, coming out from the Bering Strait southward across the Pribilofs, and then becoming northwest across the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutian areas, lighter out toward Adak and Atka, but still quite an extensive area of low clouds with some snow showers all the way out to Shemya. And then some rain and gusty winds ahead of that front as it moved into the southeast coast today. As you can see, pushing slowly eastward and kind of hung up along the North Gulf Coast there, but it will kick northward this evening. One band of moisture moved across the Copper River Basin, kind of mid and high level clouds, some precipitation on the light side. Maybe about a quarter of an inch of precipitation or 2/10 falling at Portage Glacier. Nothing heavy for that location. Otherwise, some areas didn't see anything at all. And cold temperatures up over the North Slope and the western interior with the strong gusty winds. Winds gusted along that frontal boundary up to 53 miles an hour at Middleton Island today. And Heidelberg had a 24-hour rainfall amount of about 1.4 inches, just under an inch and a half. And they had gusts to 41 miles per hour. Pelican, farther to the north, picked up about 3/4 of an inch, actually just shy of 0.8 of an inch of precipitation there. And then Metlakatla back down toward Dixon Entrance there, about 1/2 an inch of rain. So nothing really heavy, but moderate amounts, soaking rains anyway along those areas, and lighter amounts along the North Gulf Coast. Only about 1/10 of an inch falling around the Cordova area. Kodiak had snow and blowing snow today. Temperatures just edging above freezing, so the blowing snow not much of a factor with the temperature getting above freezing there. But visibilities were down to less than a mile in snow. They picked up about an inch of snow there with winds gusting out of the west-northwest to 45 miles per hour during the day today. And then snow and blowing snow the Alaska Peninsula. Cold Bay picking up about an inch of snowfall there, and that's one of the heavier amounts. And snow falling back toward the eastern Aleutians with a little bit lighter winds there. And then the cold, dry air back up over the northern Bering Sea and from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta up into the northern interior on out to the Arctic coast. For tonight, that front moves into Canada, so the rain and wind diminish over the Panhandle, become more showery. Former rain and snow showers there. Appears light rain and snow continue as the low center really doesn't move much, slowly weakens there in just east of Kodiak. So rain and snow continues, periods of North Gulf Coast, probably ending over the Copper River Basin as that front pushes to and just north of the Alaska Range, taking the band of snow into the Kuskokwim Valley to the western Alaska Range and up into the Fairbanks area. Look for some light snow at times tonight with snow showers reaching all the way to the Yukon Flats for Yukon, Beaver, Chalkitsik, and those areas, but accumulations will be probably a quarter of an inch or less there. Stays windy western interior, but winds diminish for St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula, and a weak trough brings a chance of snow showers into the western Arctic coast, possibly as far south as Point Hope, but not as far south as Kivalina. Snow and blowing snow continue. Alaska Peninsula, gusty winds there. Temperatures cold enough to keep snowfall levels at sea level. And lighter winds for Kodiak Island with still occasional snowfall there going on. Mixed conditions along the North Gulf Coast. Continue into tomorrow. That low continues to weaken east of Kodiak. They're not moving much. And it'll be kind of look for scattered rain and snow showers. Mostly cloudy skies for the Panhandle. Periods of light rain and snow again for the North Gulf Coast. Southeast part of the state, chance of snow. Snow showers in the central areas, and then mostly clear and cold. North slope, Arctic coast, down into the Bering Sea, looking pretty good with strong high pressure dominating the area there. But that gradient keeps snow and blowing snow and snow showers going for the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula through tomorrow. Sunday, that improves, but doesn't completely end there for the Alaska Peninsula. Just scattered snow showers, maybe some afternoon clearing for Alaska and Kulski, Adak and Atka, light winds, partly sunny skies. Next system out crossing Kamchatka Peninsula brings gale force winds into the western Aleutians in the afternoon. Otherwise, high pressure, light winds, cold temperatures, northern and western part of the state, eastern Bering Sea. Wind and rain and snow increase over the southern Panhandle with that next system pushing in toward the coast late in the afternoon. Lows tonight in the 30s for the Panhandle, below zero from the Kuskokwim Delta, Kuskokwim Valley, northward to the Arctic coast, north slope approaching 30 below for your lows, low of about 10 for the Pribilofs, 20s for the Aleutians, teens the lower 20s for the Alaska Peninsula, followed by highs in the upper 30s to lower 40s, south central Alaska, near freezing in the Copper River Basin, 40 to 45 for the Panhandle, teens and 20s central interior, below zero for the Seward Peninsula, north slope and the Arctic coast, and then the lows back down toward 10 for the Pribilofs out there in the Bering Sea, and near zero in the central interior, Tanana, about 2 below, Fairbanks 1 above to 5 above for Eagle, north of that line, below zero, 20 to 30 below for the north slope, 20s, southern Alaska, mid-30s, Kodiak Island, and then followed by highs, 30 to 44 over south central Alaska, 40 to 45 for the Panhandle, and staying a shade below zero over the northern interior to the Arctic.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather, some areas of IFR, North Slope and Arctic coast. Otherwise, mostly marginal VFR expected from the Brooks Range northward. A little of that might slip down into the northern Koyukuk Valley and another area into the northern and central Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, the northern Bering Sea inland across much of the central interior, VFR down into Cook Inlet, part of the Kenai Peninsula, IFR over toward the eastern and northeast Copper River Basin, another band off the eastern North Gulf Coast. Marginal VFR for the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, southern Cook Inlet, and central Aleutians, southern and southeast Bering Sea, with a band of IFR from Unalaska Island along the Alaska Peninsula. And for the afternoon, conditions shaping up like this, kind of a little more expansive area of IFR now slipping on up into the upper Tanana Valley to north of Eagle there along the Yukon River, and another area, Prince William Sound, Resurrection Bay, passes Canal eastward to Yakutat for the IFR, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, Gulf of Alaska, marginal for Kodiak Island. Alaska Peninsula westward to Adak, and then some VFR for the far western Aleutians. Northern Bering Sea stays VFR, including St. Lawrence Island, much of the southwest coast and interior areas on up to the central Brooks Range. Marginal VFR, central interior, northeastward to the eastern Brooks Range, North Slope Arctic coast, all marginal. And for the morning Sunday, marginal VFR, North Slope Arctic coast, VFR south of the Brooks Range, Yukon Flats across the northern central Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley VFR, Seward Peninsula, northwest coast, all VFR, and marginal VFR central interior, IFR, northern Copper River Basin, across the 40-mile country there to Eagle and northward. VFR Cook Inlet, Mananuska-Susitna Valley, part of the Copper River Basin, out to the southwest coast. Pribilos VFR, not too bad out over the Bering Sea, just some areas of marginal VFR, especially from Atka eastward along the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Panhandle, marginal VFR. For the afternoon, some IFR shows back up, Fognak Island, southern Kenai Peninsula, maybe Kachemak Bay, Resurrection Bay areas, and also across the southern Panhandle, VFR, Lincoln Glacier Bay, southern Alaska, central western interior, good VFR, and lingering lower conditions there for the mid and upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country with the IFR around Eagle northward a little bit, and marginal VFR eastern central Arctic coast. Band of marginal VFR there, central Bering Sea, otherwise not too bad out that way. IFR beginning to push in out toward Shimia and Attu in the afternoon. Passes Anatuvik, marginal VFR, becoming VFR. That trend also good for Adigan. Lowest conditions likely in the morning, better in the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, same trend, starting out marginal early on, becoming VFR probably through late morning or from beginning late morning through the afternoon. Rainy, same pattern. Windy, also VFR, but looks like moisture pulling in will drop conditions to marginal in the afternoon. And downward trend also for Isabel, starting marginal, becoming IFR by the afternoon. And Mentasta, look for periods of IFR throughout the entire day for that pass. Tanita, VFR becoming marginal VFR in the afternoon hours. And Portage, marginal VFR becomes IFR probably by midday, if not sooner. Chilkoot and White, occasionally marginal. Freezing levels at the surface up over the North Gulf Coast, actually into the Copper River Basin and the western Alaska Range, well south of the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern Aleutians. And looking at icing, areas of light to isolated moderate rime or mixed icing, North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. The bulk of the moisture is still in the Gulf there and from Kodiak southward. And the jet stream showing complex low centers over the central and southern part of the state. Northerly flow, Bering Sea 65 to 80 knots. Otherwise, the jet still well south of the area. Northerlies 40 to 60 knots through the central Bering Sea into the Aleutians. And some windy conditions around that Gulf of Alaska low at about 40 knots. 3,000 feet, those kick up to about 50 knots there, blowing across Middleton Island, lighter in toward the coastline. Northerlies to northeasterlies 40 to 50 knots there, eastern Bering Sea. And turbulence-wise, look for moderate chop for the western Alaska Peninsula westward to Amchitka Island, and then also moderate chop likely for the eastern North Gulf Coast off the north coast of the Panhandle and the southwest.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. but threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected and the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Look for south winds of 20 to 25 knots with seas up around 15 feet for the south coast of the Panhandle. And up to the north, gale warning, south to southeast winds up to 35 knots. Seas still at 15 feet up that way. Much lighter winds for the northern interchannel, south at 10 for the day Saturday. Seas down to about 2 feet. Southeast 15 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 20 knots. Seas around 10 feet. And for the second day of the weekend, that would be Sunday. Northwest breeze 10 knots. Northern inside waters, southeast 15 for Stevens Passage. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait. Southeast winds coming up to 25 knots. Seas building to about 5 feet. Gale warnings along the south coast for southeast winds at 35 knots. Gale warnings also for the north coast. Winds out of the east at 35 knots. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots. Seas 3 feet. Gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Middleton Island for the day Saturday. East winds at 35 knots with 17-foot seas. Western North Gulf Coast to the Barren Islands. Northeast winds at 30 knots. And for Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 20 knots, north 15 for southern Cook Inlet, north of the Forelands, light northeast breeze at 10 knots with seas down to 2 feet. And for Sunday, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots, 4-foot seas, North Gulf Coast, east-northeast 30 to 35 knots, seas around 12 feet. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, north at 35 knots. And for southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories, north winds at 25 knots, lighter winds north of the Forelands at about 15 knots from the north. Kodiak Island, northeast winds 25 knots, seas 12 feet. Gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula continue through Saturday. Northwest winds 40 to 45 knots. Bristol Bay, small craft advisories for north winds at 30 knots. And then for Sunday, Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, northwest 25, east side of Kodiak Island, northeast at 30 knots. And gale warnings continue, a little lighter though, but still 35 to 40 knots out of the north now, blowing across the Alaska Peninsula. And Bristol Bay, small craft advisories for north winds at 25 knots with 4-foot seas. Fox Islands, storm warnings, especially for Unalaska Island, north winds up to 50 knots. Unimak Island, north at 45 knots. Adak and Atka, gale warnings, north winds 40 knots. Amchitka Island, north winds at 30 knots. Kiska to Shimia, looking at a northeast wind for Saturday at 25 knots. Those pick up to gale force with that tightening gradient with the storm out toward Kamchatka Peninsula. So look for winds to come up to 40 knots from Shimei to Kiska out of the southeast, and Amchitka Island. Gale warnings developing in the afternoon as winds increase to 35 knots. Otherwise, Adak and Atka northwest at 30, and gale warnings for the Fox Islands for north to northwest winds 35 to 45 knots with seas 13 to 16 feet. For the southwest coast, gale warnings for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, north winds of 45 knots, north 30-knot winds in store for the Yukon Delta coast. Brisk wind advisories also for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. North winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for the Pribilofs. North winds at 40 knots. And the outlook for Sunday, Pribilofs northwest at 30 knots. Lighter winds for the northern Bering Sea, west-northwest at about 20, northwest 20 for the Yukon Delta coast, but gale warnings continue for the Kuskokwim Delta coast at 35 knots from the north. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, west winds 15 to 20 knots. Central coast, west at about 15, northwest 15 for the western Arctic coast down to Cape Thompson to Wales, northwest winds 20 knots. Those fall back to about 10 knots from Wales to Cape Thompson on Sunday. Otherwise, the western Arctic coast, east-northeast at 15 knots, central coast west at 10 knots, and west 15 to 20 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. For tonight, front moves inland, weaken, so rain and wind diminish and becomes more showery for the panhandle. Rain and snow continues. Light rain periods up for the North Gulf Coast. Areas of snow push into the southeast interior. Along and ahead of that front, probably ending over the Copper River Basin late tonight, are becoming scattered snow showers. Winds continue from the southwest coast along the Alaska Peninsula. Weak trough brings some snow showers into the western Arctic coast. And then for Saturday, stays unsettled and showery. Scattered rain and snow showers for the panhandle. Some light rain and snow at times for the North Gulf Coast. Areas of snow southeast interior, but nothing heavy expected. Less than an inch accumulation. Stays windy and cold for the Alaska Peninsula with periods of snow showers. That improves slowly on Sunday. Thanks for joining.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.